Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we continue with a series of lessons on Macbeth. We are going to do the last two scenes of Act 5 and also of the play, Scene 8 and Scene 9. Two very short scenes you will see. So please have your Macbeth book and your notes with you that you can follow and add notes as I'm explaining. So it's a beautiful day to learn something new. So here we go. The summary of Act 5, Scene 8. Macbeth comes face to face with Macduff, who has refused to fight anyone else but him. Macbeth experiences remorse when he is confronted by Macduff. He firmly believes that he will be able to kill Macduff and, feeling guilty about the murders of his wife and children, he refuses to fight him. When Macbeth boasts about the fact that no man can kill him, Macduff reveals that he was surgically removed from his mother's womb, thus not literally born from a woman. Macbeth briefly loses courage when he realizes that he faces certain death at the hand of Macduff. When Macduff threatens to humiliate him in public, his courage revives and he decides to die fighting. We see a glimpse of the once brave soldier here. So we ended our previous lesson with old Seward informing Malcolm that Macbeth's castle has surrendered and that the battle is almost won. So now we're on another part of the battlefield and Macbeth enters and he asks, why should I play the Roman fool and die on mine own sword? So Macbeth rejects the idea of suicide by falling on his sword, as defeated Roman leaders did to avoid being captured by the enemy. He says while he can still fight, he prefers seeing wounds on other people rather than on himself. So the gashes do better upon them. So the wounds is better on other people rather than on himself. And then Macduff enters and he screams, "Turn, hellhound, turn." So turn around, you creature from hell. So this term of address show Macduff's hatred and disgust for Macbeth. And then Macbeth answers, "Of all men else I have avoided thee, but get thee back. My soul is too much charged with blood of thine already." So Macbeth does not want to fight and kill Macduff. He feels too guilty about the murders of his family. He still firmly believes that he will be able to kill Macduff in a fight and he does not want to. We see here a glimpse of the old Macbeth. This is the only time he shows real remorse for any of his evil actions. So he says, "I do not want to kill you." And then Macduff answers, "I have no words. My voice is in my sword, thou bloodier villain than terms can give thee out." So Macduff, a man of action, says his sword will do the talking. And they start to fight. And then Macbeth says, "Thou losest labor, so you're wasting your energy in an effort to kill me." So Macbeth speaks these words in the hope of still saving Macduff's life. He firmly believes in the witch's promise, so he does not even consider losing the fight. And then he says, Macbeth says that trying to kill him is like trying to cut the air. It is a futile attempt. It will amount to nothing. He clings to the belief that he cannot be killed by somebody born of a woman. Keep in the back of your mind always the false confidence that Macbeth has in the apparitions' predictions, in what they said. Specifically this one that says he cannot be killed by a man of a woman born. So Macbeth still foolishly believes that he is invincible. And then he goes on, "Let fall thy blade on vulnerable crests." So Macduff should rather fight and kill someone that can be wounded And then he says, I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born. So then he tells him what the apparition says. So he says his life is protected by magic powers. It cannot be taken by a man born of a woman. And then Macduff answers him, despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee. Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. So triumphantly, Macduff tells Macbeth to give up the belief that he is invulnerable and allow the evil angel, the devil, whom he has served all this time, to tell him that he, Macduff, was not born naturally, but prematurely cut from his mother's womb. It is similar to the cesarean section done today, but it was only done when the mother was about to die and the baby's life could still be saved. So there Macduff made the revelation that he was not born in the natural way. Right, and then Macbeth realized, accursed be that tongue that tells me so, for it hath cowed my better part of man, and be these juggling fins no more believed. So Macbeth curses Macduff for telling him this, saying that it has destroyed his manly courage. So he is momentarily filled with fear when he finally realizes how the witches have deliberately deceived him with ambiguous prophecies. And he says, and be these juggling fins no more believed. He will no longer believe the deceptive devil-like witches. They play around with words. They palter with us in double sense, that keep the word of promise to our ear and break it to our hope. So they play around with words with double meaning. They both keep and break their promises by their equivocation. And then he goes on and he says that keep the word of promise to our ear and break it to our hope. I'll not fight with thee. So the literal meanings of prophecies have been fulfilled, but the hopes of security they raised have been crushed. Macbeth has been deceived by them. They equivocate. He then refuses to continue fighting against Macbeth. And then Macduff says, then yield thee, coward. So he's calling him a coward and commands him to surrender and live to be shown gaze of the time, that he can be shown off at a freak show to the people of Scotland for the tyrant he is. So the gaze of time is a popular exhibition like the freak shows popular at the time. And then Macduff continues by saying, we'll have thee painted upon a pole, and under it, here you may see the tyrant. So pictures of strange animals or people with deformities were painted on cloth and hung from a pole to attract people. But underneath Macbeth's picture will be painted, here you may see the tyrant. And then he goes on, Macbeth says, I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet and to be baited with the rabble's curse. So if he admits defeat and gives up fighting, he will have to humble himself before the new King Malcolm and be made fun of, mocked and cursed by the common people, as if he were a bear being baited by dogs. He's too proud and refuses to give up. Though Birnam would be come to Dunsinane, and thou opposed being of no woman born, yet I will try the last. So Macbeth will not surrender, but soldier-like fight to the end. He knows fully well he will be killed by Macduff, but fights on courageously. A return to the brave soldier he once was, a glimpse of the old Macbeth. And then he says, before my body I throw my warlike shield. So picking up his shield and holding it in front of his body, he declares himself ready for the fight to the death. Lay on, Macduff. Start fighting, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries, hold enough. Damned be the one that says we have to stop fighting. So fighting fiercely, they move off stage. Macbeth is eventually killed and beheaded by Macduff, which is somebody not born of a woman. Act 5, Scene 9, which is the last scene of this drama. Malcolm and his forces enter, having won the battle against Macbeth. Old Seward learns of his son's death. He is satisfied that he died bravely, fighting for a good cause. Macduff enters with Macbeth's head. He and the rest of the Thanes acclaim Malcolm as King of Scotland. Malcolm rewards his loyal followers and expresses his intention of restoring freedom and justice to Scotland. He makes all his Thanes earls. He promises to recall all the people that had to leave Scotland for their own safety and promises to punish Macbeth's helpers. He discloses that Lady Macbeth has probably committed suicide, good has triumphed over evil, and the natural order has been restored. Right, so there's trumpets, one trumpet signals the end of the battle, and the next announces the entry of Malcolm and his followers. So they enter with drum and colours, those are flags. Malcolm and Old Seward, Ross and the other Thanes and soldiers. Right, and it starts here where Malcolm says, I would the friends we miss were safe arrived. Right, he says, I hope everyone that took part in the battle come back safely. And then Seward answers, some must go off. In a battle situation, some people will die, it's inevitable. And yet by these I see, so great a day as this is cheaply bought. So by these I see, judged by the soldiers and Thanes that are present, so great a day as this is cheaply bought. The battle has been won without great loss of life. This is an example of dramatic irony because the audience, we know that his son has died, but he is not aware of it yet. And then Malcolm answers, Macduff is missing and your noble son. And then Ross says, your son, my lord, has paid a soldier's debt. He has been killed in battle. He only lived but till he was a man, the which no sooner had his prowess confirmed in the unshrinking station where he fought, but like a man he died. So he proved his bravery on the battlefield where he fought without retreating or showing fear. So again, Ross was the one to bring the news. He was usually the messenger. And then Seward asked, then is he dead? And Ross says, I and brought off the field. Your cause of sorrow must not be measured by his worth, for then it hath no end. So Ross said, Seward's cause for grief must not be measured by his son's worth, for then it will never end. And then Seward asked a very important question. Had he his hurts before? He wants to know if his son's wounds were on the front of his body. Now they believed in those days if the wounds were on his back, it would show he was a coward and wounded while running away. But if the wounds were on the front of his body, it shows that he died while fighting, and that this is how young Seward died. And Ross confirms this when he says, yes, on the front. And then Seward goes on, why then God's soldier be he? His father shows pride because his son died fighting for a good cause. Had I as many sons as I have heirs, I would not wish them to a fairer death. So being a soldier, Seward cannot think of a more honorable death than dying on the battlefield, and he will gladly have all his sons die this way. And then he said, and so his knell is knolled. So the funeral bell announcing young Seward's death has been rung. His father can now proudly accept that his son has died fighting bravely for a good cause. Malcolm answers, he is worth more sorrow and that I'll spend for him. So Malcolm offers a proper mourning for young Seward, but old Seward declines. He says he's worth no more. All right. He's satisfied that his son died bravely. Now, if we compare this reaction of Malcolm to Malcolm's rather callous reaction to the murder of Macduff's family, he has surely grown. And then Seward says he's worth no more. They say he parted well and paid his score. So everyone says he died an honorable death, so God be with him. Here comes new comfort. And he says someone else is coming. And then Macduff enters with Macbeth's head. So this is a fitting end to a tyrannical rule. It implies that one loses everything if one interferes with the natural order of life to achieve a selfish goal. And then Macduff is speaking, Hail King, he's addressing Malcolm, for so thou art, behold, where stands the usurper's cursed head. So remember, usurper is a person who takes a position of power illegally. And Macduff has beheaded Macbeth and is probably carrying it on the point of his sword or at the top of a spear or a pole. And he hails Malcolm as the new king. And he says, the time is free. Freedom has returned to Scotland. The tyranny has stopped. By killing Macbeth, he has stopped the tyranny. And then he goes on and he says, I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl that speak my salutation in their minds. So Malcolm is surrounded by the loyal nobility of Scotland. And Macduff invites them to join him in hailing Malcolm as the next king. So he says, whose voices I desire aloud with mine. Hail King of Scotland, hail King of Scotland. Right, and now Malcolm is presenting his closing speech, and his closing speech presents his confidence, his graciousness and nobility as the new king. Order has been restored, and with it, the wholesome values of harmony and peace. So the play closes on a note of hope. We feel confident that under the wise and just rule of Malcolm, Scotland will be restored to her former glory. So Malcolm starts immediately where he says, we shall not spend a large expense of time before we reckon with our several loves. So he announces that he will waste no time to reward his followers for their loyalty. He says, and make us even with you, my thanes and kingsmen, henceforth be earls, the first that ever Scotland in such an honour named. He announces that all the thanes loyal to him will now be earls, and they will be the first in the history of Scotland to get this high rank. And then he goes on, what's more to do, which would be planted newly with the time, as calling home our exiled friends abroad that fled the snares of watchful tyranny, producing forth the cruel ministers. So whatever else remains to be done will be carried out in due time, like he will call home all those who have fled the country to escape Macbeth's tyrannical rule, and in addition, Macbeth's followers or helpers will be punished appropriately. So notice that like his late father Duncan, Malcolm uses imagery from nature, right, where he says, which would be planted. And these images are healthy and life-affirming, and they suggest return to decent moral values. Right, and then he goes on of this dead butcher and his fen-like queen. So this creates an image of slaughter. Macbeth slaughtered the king and all others who stood in the way of his overriding ambition. Lady Macbeth is associated with evil spirits and demonic forces. So this is the perception in Scotland regarding the Macbeths. Nobody has any idea of the supernatural influence of the witches or the feelings of guilt, remorse, and anguish experienced by them. And then he talks about the queen who, as it is thought, by self and violent hands took off her life. So it is believed that Lady Macbeth committed suicide, and what needful else that calls upon us by grace of grace we will perform in measure, time, and place. So Malcolm acknowledges the role of God in restoring order in Scotland. Everything that remains to be done will be performed properly at the right time and place. There will be no more chaos and destruction. And he ends off with so thanks to all at once and to each one whom we invite to see us crowned at Scone. So he invites everyone for his own coronation, like all the Scottish kings that will happen at Scone. So the theme here evident is the restoration of the natural order. The death of Macbeth marks the end of extreme disorder. Order is restored when Malcolm becomes king. Malcolm finally invites everybody to attend his crowning at Scone. So now we have time to discuss a few open-ended questions and answers as we found them in some old question papers. Right, the statement is made. Macbeth contributes to Lady Macbeth's death. Discuss your view. Remember, when you work with an open-ended question, you must make your point. You say yes or no, explain it, give an example, and link to the question. So there's 4 things to remember. Make a point, explain it, give an example, and link to the question. Very important, if you are asked to give your view, you must be clear whether it is yes or no. Make it clear in the first part of your question, your answer, your first sentence in your answer. The marker must clearly be able to see whether you say yes, you agree with this statement, or no, you do not agree. Remember, a question where there is a yes and no answer, you can give a combination answer. You must just make very sure that your motivation fit with your yes and your motivation fit with the no. So Macbeth contributes to Lady Macbeth's death. Discuss your view. So yes means you agree that he does contribute to Lady Macbeth's death, and now you must give a motivation. Remember, your answer must always be grounded in the text. That's where the example comes in. You can't just give a generic answer without examples from the text, otherwise you will not receive your marks. So the first answer is yes. Initially, Macbeth confides in Lady Macbeth when he tells her about the prophecy of the witches. He calls her his dearest partner of greatness, yet later he excludes her from the plan to murder Banquo. There are quite a few examples from the text in those sentences. And then they are not so close as they were when they planned Duncan's murder. Macbeth is intent on securing his position as king, thus he does not focus on anything else, not even on Lady Macbeth. As a result, she becomes lonely and self-absorbed. Then Lady Macbeth only finds out later about the cruel deeds her husband has committed, the killing of Lady Macduff and her children, and this causes her insanity and later suicide. If you said no, Macbeth did not contribute to Lady Macbeth's death, Lady Macbeth is responsible for her own death as she prays to evil spirits to fill her with evil to commit the killing of Duncan, which she later regrets. She is the one who directs Macbeth onto the path of destruction and becomes ridden or consumed with guilt, and she loses her mind as she cannot take the strain anymore, the sleepwalking, and then she commits suicide. The next one, it's almost the same. Consider the play as a whole. Discuss whether you sympathize with what eventually happens to Lady Macbeth. Now, what eventually happens to her? She commits suicide. You have to say, yes, I sympathize with her committing suicide, or no, I do not sympathize with her. So if you said, no, I do not sympathize, she invites the forces of evil, or summons the forces of evil to fill her with cruelty. She plays a pivotal role in the murder of Duncan. She influences Macbeth to murder Duncan. She is complicit in Duncan's murder and therefore is justified in feeling the guilt that eventually leads to her committing suicide. Or, yes, you sympathize with her. She's inherently good, and to become evil asks to be filled with cruelty. She commits evil deeds because of her love for Macbeth, or because of the idea of being queen. Her guilt is misplaced because it is Macbeth who embarks on a killing spree. Her emotional fragile elicits the sympathy of the audience, and she feels a strong sense of remorse for having set Macbeth on the path of murder. Remember, again, you're allowed to give a yes-no combination answer. Look at the mark allocation that will also determine the length of your answer. Again, make a point, explain your point, give an example linked to the question. Do you think that Lady Macbeth deserves what happened to her? What happened to her? She committed suicide. Do you think she deserved it? It's almost the same as the previous one. Yes, she deserved it. She prayed to evil spirits to fill her body from head to toe. She knows about the consequences of what will happen if you kill the king. It's the disruption of the natural order. She was prepared to kill Duncan herself only if he did not resemble her father. She manipulated and almost forced Macbeth to commit the murder. Or no, she did not deserve what happened to her. Everyone makes mistakes. She does not deserve to die like that. She does it because she loves Macbeth so much. It was Macbeth's ambition to become king, and she realizes that he will not be able to do it on his own. Remember, too full of the milk of human kindness. And then Macbeth distanced himself from her when he became a tyrant. In other words, he left her alone. Refer to the play as a whole. Remember, when we get questions, we must also always look for the time frame they're giving us. Play as a whole, in this scene, in this extract, up to this point in the play. Look for all of those keywords that will determine the content of your answer. Okay, refer to the play as a whole. Is Macduff irresponsible when he flees from Scotland? So is he irresponsible or is he not? So if you said yes, he is irresponsible, he leaves his wife and children unprotected. He should have realized what consequences his action by not attending the coronation and the banquet would have for his family. It appears that he loves his country more than his family. His first thought should have been to provide his family with security before he flees. Macduff is suspicious of Macbeth, the killing of Duncan and the guards, and should have known what Macbeth is capable of. Or no, Macduff was not irresponsible. Macduff wants to serve his country before all else. He flees to England to request Malcolm's assistance in raising an army to overthrow Macbeth. He supports Malcolm, who is the rightful heir to the throne, and wants order to be restored in Scotland. He could not have known that Macbeth would go to that extreme to have his family murdered. Discuss the relevance of the play Macbeth in the modern day life. They love to ask this. Discuss the relevance. So how is it relevant of the play Macbeth? In other words, what happens in the play in modern day life. So here's just a few guidelines from the marking guidelines that you can follow. The message of Macbeth, the triumph of good over evil, is timeless. Human nature is such that evil, if allowed to prevail, can destroy a person, as with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. The presence or influence of the supernatural is still prevalent today, as with Scotland. Then political strife, conflict over leadership succession are present in the world today. You can also talk about the ambition of Macbeth that led to his downfall, that can be applicable to modern day life, etc., etc. And then discuss why Macbeth is a suitable title for the drama. Why Macbeth is a suitable title, right? So Macbeth is about a man whose greed caused him to fall apart. He's the protagonist or the central character as the tragic hero. Shakespeare shows how a fatal flaw in Macbeth's character leads to his downfall. So Shakespeare uses the character of Macbeth to illustrate how good human beings can be corrupted by the forces of evil. The meaning of Macbeth, son of life, contradicts with his actions in the play, and the main theme of the drama is destruction, and Macbeth destroys not only Scotland, but also people, his family, his wife, his cousin, his best friend, and ultimately himself. Right, that concludes our lessons on Macbeth. We are done with the drama. Tomorrow we are going to have a quick look at the themes and the characters a little bit more in detail, and maybe a few questions from old papers as well. So I hope you enjoyed these lessons as much as I did. Have a wonderful afternoon further. Stay safe, make wise choices. Goodbye.